Thank you so much for joining us today. Anyway, for our listeners, I can't wait for them to be able to learn a little bit about apraxia, because like we were talking about earlier, so few people know about it. So LeeAnn, you have 6 children.
I do. I do.
And you work as a financial planner, that you have your hands full. Tell us a little bit about what you do for a living, how you juggle all your kids.
Well, I have them all spread out. So the oldest one will be 22 next month. I just had one turn 18 this week. And the baby, he'll be 4 the first week of April.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, May. Jeez. So I have an 18-year spread in there. So thankfully they're not all together. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to do anything.
And I'm sure as a financial planner, you worked all the financial part of having 6 kids out well too.
I don't know how.
Oh.
It's like a lot of planning, a lot of deciding, being very controlled in what we want to spend on, and very precise in our decisions about, where we want to spend it, especially when you have children with that are not neurotypical. A lot of spending around therapies and little items that will help them, have a better future, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So tell us, what is apraxia?
Well, there's a couple different kinds of apraxia, actually. I just learned the second one. I went to have my 3-year-old evaluated because we've suspected him to have apraxia since he was 1. And 3 years is kind of when they look into it or diagnose. They want to give them enough time to really start speaking before they give them that diagnosis. Apraxia, the way they described it to me when I first learned about the diagnosis was, it's a motor planning problem. Basically, your brain knows exactly what you're saying, but when it comes to the mouth is not functioning in a way that puts those letters, those sounds out like a typical brain would. They said that to learn a new word for an apraxia child, or an adult really, a neurotypical person could take a few times to say the word right. It may take up to 1,000 times for the child to be able to say that word properly. So, and it's because they have to go and rewire their brain to be able to get out the same sounds that we do. It's very similar to a stroke patient, for example. And that would be another way that you can get apraxia, is through things like stroke, where that part of your brain is now, I don't know what you want to call it. It's no longer working properly. Yeah. So they have to rewire, basically. And it takes a very long time to get that through. And then the other one that I just learned was just oral apraxia. And that's, they suspected my one son to have it because if he were to say, for example, shh, like that, you have the sounds that come together. Well, his lips go like this, right? like that. Or stuffing of mouths. They can't tell there's all that food in there. So they just stuff their mouths full of food to have that sensory input to know to chew. And he's 7 years old and he looks like a little squirrel when he eats. I'm like, maybe he does have that. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So how common is apraxia?
It's actually not very common at all. I believe I heard that maybe 1/10 of children that have speech delays or speech disorders may have apraxia. So it's a percentage of the population. So.
Interesting. Wow. Well, thank you so much for educating me on that, and everyone else, because I've heard, quite a few people within the circle that I spend most of my time talk about apraxia, but I assumed it was similar to dyslexia because it has an X in it and an IA, but they are very different.
Mhm.
Except for it's a nerve, brain stems from the brain.
Mhm.
But yeah.
With Apraxia and a lot of the EAs, with a lot of them, they have comorbidities.
Yeah,
So
the
I
dis
am,
do too.
yeah, and I know my son has just we just had a meeting from the school. Our school has been very good about not trying to put barriers up about getting testing, and he is now going to be tested for dyslexia and dysgraphia,
Wow.
dyscalculia, and only because it kind of runs along the lines of when he's writing, he can write words just fine. But when he goes to write sentences, everything just falls apart, just like his speech. He's doing really good where he is mimicking just fine. He can say words properly, but when he puts them in a sentence, or if he gets too fast or his thoughts are too fast for what his mouth can handle, it kind of falls apart and then you can't understand him anymore. And that's now what's happening with his writing. So they're just trying to hit this and nip it in the bud, I guess, before he gets too much older.
That's amazing that they have testing for all three in Ohio. I did not know that dyscalculia testing was available anywhere in the country. I mean,
Um,
in a school setting, of course.
yeah, I'm
With
not sure.
COVID and-
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what they're gonna do about that part of the testing, but I just as a parent, which I'm sure most people do, I go and have my child see private therapy as well, just to give them an extra boost up. And I have talked to the OT department there, and between the SLP for him talking to the OT, they're doing their battery of tests. They said OT does kind of like the whole gamut of all of it. So
That's great. Well, if he needs any kind of dyslexia, dysgraphia, or dyscalculia tutoring, we're here for you.
that's great because that's where he's going next.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been the really nice thing about COVID is we can tutor anywhere in the country. It doesn't matter where people are anymore.
It
So
is. It's so nice. It really is. And he picked up really well for online, for even for speech. He's done really well with online therapies.
that's great. Yeah. I mean, who would have thought that you could do speech therapy online? But
Yeah.
they've made everything, most things work, virtually.
Yep. And it's kind of funny because she'll ask us to put a mirror up beside the computer, and then she'll tell him to grab his own face or doing everything. So it's so funny watching it.
Well, that's awesome. So, do you want to share anything else with us about dyspraxia or your financial planning?
Um, well, I'm trying to think. Um, I think that's about as much as I know as far as apraxia goes.
Any
With
recommendations for people if they live somewhere where their schools aren't as cooperative?
private private testing, that's where we started.
And who would they go to for private testing?
Well, for me in Ohio, I my children go to Nationwide Children's Hospital. You can an SLP can get started. A lot of times, apraxia is not diagnosed until at least 3. That's kind of their sweet number for diagnosis. But there's telltale signs of apraxia, not babbling when they're supposed to. My son, he was almost 3.5, and he didn't have one word. And so I would say there's a lot of telltale signs. If anybody has access to a Help Me Grow program, that's usually a federally funded program, comes out of your taxes, and you can have them come to the house and they can work with your child. The one that I had, she was so knowledgeable in the area, and she's like, I really think he has apraxia, especially since Big Brother has it. So that helped out with that. And then she was able to help us get into a preschool program. getting his IEP. They helped set up the IEP for school, or helped coordinate it with the school system to get that all set up. So he was on an IEP since right as soon as he turned 3 years old, he was put into school. That really helped. That helped a lot, having that peer support and the peer modeling. He's still not talking a lot, my 3-year-old, but he is leaps and bounds better than what he was. He's saying more than one word at a time, and he's actually talking within 6 months or so.
And is he in general ed class, or is it kids?
It's a combination class. So because it's preschool, they have neurotypicals alongside the children with IEPs. It's about 50-50, and the neurotypicals, they're great modelers. So it's really kind of nice, actually. and he has both of my sons have Apraxia, and both of them, as soon as they started preschool, it just picked up so much better for them. And you can tell the growth spurts that they have. Usually it's as soon as they get back into classes for the fall. Both of them had a huge growth spurt. And then there was a lag because we had COVID out and we were out 2 months for school. But as soon as they went back in, both of them had another big growth spurt with their language. Wow. So it's really nice to see.
Definitely the socializing helps them with the picking up the words. I mean, even with 4 other or 5 other siblings.
Mm-hmm. and it's so different with your siblings. Your siblings can talk to you, but I mean, I know with my siblings, I was like, whatever, I don't hear you. I don't see you. And that's kind of what's going on at the house, especially when I have an 18-year-old or 18-year gap between the oldest and the youngest. My older 3, I have 15, 18, and 22 almost. And then the younger 3 is 9, 7, and 3. So, and those younger 3 are boys, and boy, they'd rather fight than talk. So. But another thing is, if I know with my son, he was able to qualify for Social Security because it's such a significant barrier with his peers and everything. And that's helped be able to pay for extra services that needed, like tutoring, for example.
That's amazing.
So I would definitely consider it. I had a little bit of a barrier, well, especially with COVID, and then we got cut down with a lot of hours. So we qualified financially because of being cut down with hours. And at first I had a barrier. I didn't want to think, that I didn't want to think that I was taking it away from somebody else, but at the same time, I want my kids to have that extra help and to have those services available to them that we can pay for now. And then that's what we did. So I would definitely look into the Social Security program in their state to see if they qualify, if they have Apraxia. I don't know how that works for dyslexia or anything.
Yeah, there's nothing. Well, it depends where you are, what kind of services you get.
Yes.
But most states don't provide services in the school at this point. And the states that are starting to provide services in school, it's not the best because, you're in a group setting, and when you're in a group setting for dyslexia, it's not ideal. One-on-one is ideal because, unlike with the Apraxia where the mimicking helps, when you're in a group setting for language arts, you're going to have to go the slowest as the slowest student can go.
Yep.
And if someone's out that day, they can't move forward because everything builds on itself in Orton-Gillingham. And they've got to be using an Orton-Gillingham program, or that's not going to help a dyslexic person.
See, and I'm glad you said that. I've never heard of that. So now I get to look something else
up.
Oh,
yes. Orton-Gillingham. It's been around since the 30s.
Okay.
And, there's so many different programs out now, but they have to have a Orton-Gillingham base. And there's a lot of different Orton-Gillingham type of things. But it's because it's systematic, the way it's taught, that the kids are able to, or the adults are able to take in the information at so much quicker of a rate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
See, that's with Apraxia, they also the suggested therapy for Apraxia, and I'm not sure for dyslexia, but for Apraxia is 3 to 5 therapies per week, and at least 30 minutes. It's best if it's an hour. Yeah, our school does not provide that. Or I am lucky if I got 100 and I think it's 120 minutes a month for my son. I mean, they've done really well as far as getting them the testing they need, getting the diagnosis they need. They're not so great with giving the minutes. A lot, and I'm sure this goes everywhere. Everybody's understaffed, and so they just kind of throw people in. They're like, "Oh, well, we'll have the speech therapist come into the classroom," and I'm like, "Okay, but that's not the actual best therapies for them. The best therapies are one-on-one, rapid repetition." Um, they've only have a couple programs where they've actually done research-backed studies and peer-reviewed studies on it. And it's basically is you say nonsense words that have no meaning. So it's just as long as, like, if you or I could go in and read these words with the right intonations, even they're nonsense words, they don't even exist. They use those words and just make them, like, they drive it in 100 times, 100 repetitions per word. And they found that helps. The schools aren't always on board, but I have a really good SLP. She took the time over the summer to learn the program that I sent her. So that's what she does. My son loves the therapy. He does get 20 minutes every week privately just to do that therapy. But yeah, I mean, it's so hard because the school's understaffed. So it's kind of like you can't squeeze blood from a turnip. And then, like you said, it's a building process. So it's so difficult. But
well, and we use nonsense words.
do you too?
Yeah, to make sure that the student can read the word or spell the word without just memorizing it. Because
Wow.
dyslexic people will often memorize to a certain point,
Yep.
and then they've reached their wall of where they can memorize things.
That's Apraxia, and that's my son, and that's why we're working on making sure he doesn't have dyslexia or dysgraphia or dyscalculia. Because like you said, at a certain point there's a wall. You can't memorize everything.
Right.
And that's what they're trying to make sure, that he isn't hitting that wall, because that's what he's doing. He can memorize words, he can memorize spelling tests, but if you have him try to sound out the word, he can't do it because it's all, getting jumbled up there. And then the word, he's no longer able to spell words or even read words in his sight words. Like, for example, would, should, could. He can see them, he can read them from that sight word list because it's mechanical memory. But then when you put it in a book, he's like, I don't know what that word is. It's like, okay, dude. So, and it's just amazing how the brain works. And it's amazing how these kiddos can do things like memorization. They're creating their own coping mechanisms to be able to cheat the system, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it.
Yes, and they do. And I mean, he's phenomenal. He's an awesome memorizer. He can spell words that he memorizes, but to be able to spell words, just to say, okay, spell what, and you tell him, if you give him the words, he'll memorize it. He spells it for you. But if he had to sound things out, well, what's kind of a hard one, but cake or something, he can't spell those. Like, he might put CAC.
Well, cake is a hard one too.
That is too.
Because we don't teach silent E's until like a year and a half into our program, because silent E's are so hard.
He memorized that rule though, and he knows the E's at the end makes that the long sound or whatever. However they taught it, he does. I'm not
sound at the end.
Huh?
The E's don't make any sound at the end.
Well, yeah, I know they don't, but they make the sound in the middle.
The other letter long. Yeah.
Yep. And he knows that, and it's kind of amazing that he's memorizing these rules to be able to just spout them off. He can't do it, but yeah, it's all about memorization. And if we can get them while their brains are so like, while they're still learning, this is the best time to learn like foreign languages, to be able to learn our language and proper things. And before it starts settling into these more like typical pathways or more, defined pathways, this is the best time to get them help.
I took a class in a workshop that I went to, and they were talking about the brain is most absorbent for foreign languages up until age 12.
Yep.
And in America, we don't start teaching them a foreign language until they're 12. And math is better the other way around. Brains aren't ready for math until they're 12. And then when they're 12, they're more ready. But, we're teaching them math when they're in kindergarten and first grade. I mean, yeah, you can teach them basic things, but it would make more sense to flip the time around that was spent doing those subjects.
Yep. And I know with my school, when I was in high school, we didn't start language until 9th, 10th grade. So we were like 14, 16.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like, wait a minute here. Yeah. And I learned that and I'm like, why in the world would you start? And it's probably because math is, is binary to up to a point until you start doing reading problems, but they use different parts of the brain.
Yes. So, yeah.
And that's probably why my son is top of his class in math as opposed to reading. He has 100% in his sciences, his maths, but his reading and his writing is about 65% right now. So, and it's like, well, we know that he has the ability. It's just because of that language and where it gets all mixed up in there, it affects spelling, it affects reading, it affects writing, it affects storytelling, it affects all this stuff.
Everything. And I assume you couldn't get an accurate IQ test score either.
Well, they are going to do an IQ test on him. I'm not sure. We just had that meeting a couple weeks ago. So I think they have a couple more weeks before they have to do all that testing.
Take that with a lot of grain of salt.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Of salt. Yeah, because with my daughter, she couldn't read when she got tested for the first time in 4th grade. So she scored really, really low. And I didn't understand back then, but it was because she was not able to read the grade level work that the test expects you to be able to read. So if you can't read it, it eschews the whole testing.
And it's very discouraging. It's discouraging for the parents. It's discouraging for the children. The children at that age, they really don't know what's going on anyway at that point, but they can read, they can feel your emotions when you see this stuff. And it sends off those vibes like, oh, I might have done something wrong. And they didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do anything wrong, feeling upset about it. But, kids can't read that. So then they put into their own head, they have to create these stories, to feel like, oh, why was mom upset about this? And they could say, oh, I'm a bad student or whatever their story is that they made up, because their mind has to make up a story to make things understandable to them. So it's just the whole psychology of it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if you're thinking, well, I'm a bad student, then you're going to become that because you're not going to have any expectations for yourself. And they start to feel bad anyway, because that's all they hear is from the different various places, and they see it, unfortunately.
And it's kind of traumatizing. I couldn't imagine. I didn't have those kind of problems. We were talking before this that I may have ADHD. I'm kind of all over the place. And now that I reflect on my childhood, I'm like, oh, I probably do have it because I've had the problem all the way through school, oh, I'm a bad student. So, or my thing was I'm a perfectionist. And if I didn't think I could get a perfect score, I was like, whatever, I ain't going to do it at all. And all that stuff. And it plays into who you become as an adult. My son is a big perfectionist. He is over the moon with math because he can do it. So but when it comes to reading, we're fighting. This kid is just like, I'm not doing it. And it's like, you got to do it, dude. And, we're constantly kind of button heads on it. And that's not the way to be, because then he's going to have a confrontational outlook in life. He's going to argue about things that he doesn't want to do. And the whole thing, it's just amazing what these kids have to go through. Again, my son, because he's a perfectionist, he gets very mad and he has an anger problem because of it. And so it's like the whole thing, it's amazing what atypical students have to go through and what they're going to have to overcome, especially on their own, just to fit in with typical life. So,
well, I think, you know, the world we're coming into is a lot better for them to, you know,
yeah,
find their way than it
a
was.
lot more understanding.
Well, and there's just more jobs available for them that
Yeah.
are, you know, out of the box. I mean, especially with COVID, people will work from home
Yeah.
forevermore. You know, there will be some sort of like flex type thing, but so
Mhm.
many companies have discovered that their employees are more productive and it saves them money. So,
Yeah.
you know, like that gives them the flexibility to not have to necessarily be in an office sitting at a cubicle all day, something like that. It's been so nice talking to you, and I just wanted to thank you for donating a raffle, and in addition to for doing the interview. But it says that you will offer a one coaching and strategy session to help with goal planning or just soundboard for communication. Oh, communicating, sorry. Their concerns with their current situation. I want to win this.
Yeah, I can totally do that. A lot of parents that have neurotypical or atypical kids, they run into financial problems because they have to figure out who gets to work. Like, we're at therapy 4 or 5 days a week. So either I work or my husband works. And then, you know, the other one is barely part-time. So I want to be able to provide that, to be able to either do budgeting strategy with them or finding other, like, just coaching them on different outside the box things that they wouldn't typically be able to come up with on their own. So hopefully that'll help somebody.
Yeah, that is awesome. Thank you so much for donating that to our listeners, and we'll see who gets to win that. All right, and thank you again for doing the interview.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Yeah.